All right, we're ready to go. Welcome. We will start our budget hearings today with public debt, and we have our analyst, Patrick Frank. Welcome.
Pardon? Okay. We're good? Okay. We will start with page 1. It has the bar chart that shows fiscal year 2025, 2026, and 2027. A couple things stand out from this. First of all, most of it is yellow. That means it's special funds, and most of the special funds are the state property tax, and that will be discussed in more depth later. Secondly, a very unusual thing happens in 2026, and that costs are actually declining in that fiscal year as opposed to increasing as they generally tend to do with a growing capital program. The public debt pays for the capital program through GO bonds. What happened was in 2010, there were a lot of issuances, and it dropped off considerably in 2011. At this time, as you all know, there was during the Great Recession, and the state needed to cut back a little bit. And as a result of that, you have a lot of debt that matured in 2025, and it's not being replaced by debt in 2026. And so unusually, there was actually a drop there's a drop in 2026. Which I don't see happening anytime soon, and I had to check my numbers 3 times when I looked at all that stuff to make sure all the numbers added up, but they do. On page 3, on the public debt is the program description. Basically what this does is describe all the different kinds of bonds, and that there are some traditional GO bonds that are fixed rate, and there are also taxable bonds and some tax credit bonds as well. Page 4 in exhibit number 1 shows a pie chart that shows what share of the debt service is interest and what share is principal. As you can see, interest is only 30% of the debt service. And the reason for that is that Maryland has short maturities. The Constitution limits them to 15 years. The average maturity on a bond is 10 years. And so as a result, you get you pay off your debt quicker and pay less interest. If Maryland, say, had 30-year bonds, it would be more like 50-50, the split between interest and principal. Page 5 shows how we arrived at the amount that is in the allowance for fiscal year 2027. As you can see from that, 96% of the debt costs are from bonds that have already been issued. And so this is in some ways, this is a pretty easy budget to estimate. You just have to ask, what are we going to issue next year? And then that little percent gets added on the top of it. On page 6 is exhibit number 3. This shows the long-term forecast for the annuity bond fund. And the annuity bond fund is the fund that receives the state property taxes and then pays the state's debt service. There's a couple of lines that I think are most important. The first one on the top is state property tax receipts, which is $1.1 billion in 2026. That grows, so the revenues grow at about 3% in the forecast, through the forecast period. Next line I would draw your attention to is towards the bottom is debt service expenditures. That's $1.4 billion. And as you can see on the far right of that row, it's about 4% growth. So debt service costs are expected to increase faster than the state property tax. So what do we do about that? That's where the general fund comes in. The general fund contribution makes up the difference between those two numbers. And you can see that grows from about $155 million in 26, which is an unusually low year, and it grows to $400 million by the end of the forecast period. And one last set of numbers that will also be discussed later in the analysis are, if you look at bond premium deposits, $80 million in 2026 and $80 million in 2027, those are essentially bond premiums that are being projected for this budget, and they will help pay the debt service. And so I'll discuss the risks associated with doing that. On page 7 is exhibit number 4. If you're going to rely on state property taxes for your debt service, you probably should know a little about what's going on in the property markets. And so what this exhibit does is it's got the The red line, which is the median sales price, as you can see that that's been increasing steadily. Obviously, it declined for a while when the markets crashed, and now it's been increasing again steadily. The dotted line is the inventory, so how many homes are for sale. That's been fairly low in recent years, and there may be a relationship there that lower inventories may push up prices. On page 8 is exhibit number 5, and what that shows is a unique feature in Maryland's state property taxes, and that is the homestead tax credit. Essentially what that does is it limits how much an individual's taxes are going to increase every year to 10%. And so what you have is if your assessment increases by more than 10%, that difference goes into this homestead tax credit, and you pay less taxes as a result of that. What was helpful for that was, strangely, when the prices were increasing very much in the late 2000s, what we saw is a huge spike in these homestead tax credits. So in Maryland, property taxes assessments were increasing, but only quite a bit less than than the assessments were increasing. So the payment was less than the assessment. The result was this large increase in the homestead tax credit. When the market declined, what you see then is this is advantageous to the state as well as to the taxpayers, and that is we didn't have a big drop immediately in state property tax revenues. In fact, they still increased while assessments were dropping. The reason is that this tax credit was being worked down, and it went from about $70 billion in 2008 to about $1 billion in 2014. And that's why the line that you see there, that's the average collections percent per penny, I should say, of tax was increasing even when assessments were decreasing, and that stabilized the revenues, and that actually was, from the state's perspective, a very good feature, because we didn't have an emergency in that fund to fund as well. There were enough emergencies at that time, as I remember. On page 9 is exhibit number 6, and this shows again the difference between the state property tax collections that we're estimating and the debt service, and that difference is to be made up. I'll start with my issues on page 10. The first has to do with the downgrade in the state's AAA bond rating by Moody's. The state had never had anything but 3 AAA ratings prior to this last June. So all of the rating agencies commented about Maryland is a high wealth state, a broad diverse economy, the things they say all the time. They commend us for well-embedded financial practices, but there obviously were some concerns by Moody's. The others did not raise these concerns to the point of affecting the rating. First, I'll go to page 11, exhibit number 7, and what this does is it compares Maryland to all the states that have AAA ratings from all 3 rating agencies, and it looks at various liabilities from debt service ones like we're talking about in this analysis, but they also consider pension liabilities, OPEB liabilities, and they do something what they call capital asset depreciation ratio. And essentially what that is the state's, state-owned buildings and capital assets like that. And we have a very variable building stock. And so in all of these indicators, we are among the highest, either first or second in all the categories. So the point of this is that Maryland has an unusually high rate of liabilities compared to other states. Also, on page 12, a question I get asked is, what about all the stadium debt? How does that fit into all of this? A lot of that debt is, if it's lottery debt, we don't consider it to be state debt in state law. And so we exclude it, but a lot of the rating agencies do actually include the lottery bonds as state debt. So I'm not sure there's a complete consensus on this, but it certainly is something that is considered and we should be aware of. And so I point out what the different kinds of authorizations are that are, in a sense, outside of the state debt that are also considered. Moody's did mention that there are criteria that they have for upgrading Maryland back to AAA. One is that Maryland GDP growth is faster than the state. Also, that we demonstrate a reduced vulnerability to what's happening in the federal government and the disruptions there. And finally, the structural deficit to eliminate. At the last bond sale, my first question in my mind was, well, how does this downgrade affect Maryland's interest rates? What does this mean for us? And so what I did my statistical analysis that I've done for years now, and I've added a variable for the last bond sale and said, well, how does that, if you use that variable, how does that compare? And counterintuitively, we actually did relatively better than other states after the Maryland downgrade, which made me very nervous. And I checked my numbers a few times. I said, what am I going to tell the Appropriations Committee? They're going to think I'm crazy for saying this. But then I talked to the Treasurer's Office as well, and they said something I thought, which I was considering, which I think solves the mystery. And that is, they mentioned that there was something called a flight to quality at the last bond sale. What that essentially means is that when there's a lot of uncertainty and financial disruption, people get nervous and scared. And when they get nervous and scared, what they want to do is to do things that are safer. And if you have a bond that is rated AAA by 2 rating agencies and AA1 by the 3rd, you're about as close as the safest thing there is. And so as a result, this flight to quality with people wanting to buy bonds that are safer swamped any effects that were from the downgrade. And so counterintuitively, we actually had now what would have happened if we had not gotten downgraded? I don't have enough data for that. I'd need data from all the other states. I could only do a comparison between Maryland and the averages, but so we don't know. So the jury is still out on any effects that this had, but curiously, we had actually a relatively good sale. And if you look at page 8, Exhibit 8 on page 14, what you can see there is the differences between the bond buyer 20 bond index, is the index that I use as a comparison. And basically, we're like 0.3% or 0.6% better in all the other bond sales, but now we're like 1.6% better in the most recent sale. And that kind of shows that difference that I was talking about, that relative to the index, Maryland actually performed quite well. All right, the next issue that I'm going to talk about has to do with the bond sale premiums. And what happened in the last sale and what our plans are with regard to forecasting them. I'll start with page 15, exhibit number 9. What this shows, this is just a reconciliation of where we were a year ago to where we are now. In case somebody pulls the old analysis or looks at the governor's numbers from a year ago, they were $134 million estimated a year ago. They got re-estimated to $127 million after some unallocated premiums came out and some costs associated with that would be supported by premiums were taken out of the budget. So $127 million, as you can see on page 10, exhibit 10 and page 15, is kind of the number. That's $44 million for debt service, $83 million for projects. The actual premiums were about $92 million. So we missed the target, about $35 million. This new bill authorizes the new capital budget authorizes $5 million for a project. So we're about $40 million short based on the last bond sale. Now, we have plenty of cash and reserves, so this it's an accounting issue that eventually we'll have to find that money, but we don't have to have it right now. So, I mean, what premiums and interest rates are all about is what's going on in the market and what are they going to be moving forward. And so if you look at Exhibit 11 on page 16, that shows the U.S. 10-year Treasury note rate since January of 1962. I use the 10-year rate because our average bond maturity is 10 years, so it matches very nicely. Also, it's the longest series that I could find that was very reliable. And so I use that. And what you see there is the blue line that bounces up and down, but that's what the rate was and every business day in which the markets were open. So there's, I don't know how many tens of thousands of values are in there. What the red line shows, the flat red line, that shows what the interest rates were on the day, January 27th, when I collected all this data. And so the one point of this chart was, how are interest rates doing right now compared to the last 60-some years? And the answer is, about 2/3 of the time, interest rates were higher than they were on January 27th. And so in a relative sense, we're not in a very high interest rate period. We're obviously higher than we were. Another interesting point, I think, from this is if you look at the 2020 number in the chart, it was about 2% is what interest rates were before the pandemic started. So even before the pandemic started, interest rates were among their lowest. During the pandemic, obviously, they became, I think from the data I can find, unprecedentedly low. And so that's kind of where we are. And so, and the next chart on page 12, or excuse me, exhibit 12 on page 17, shows just the most recent sales that we've had and compares the 20-year bond index to our sale. Also uses the federal rate. And what's interesting about that, if you look at the most recent sale, the yellow line that goes across, that's the interest rate that's the 5% coupon rate that we have on our bonds. So that's if it's above 5%, we have to raise that coupon rate because we're not, we're not fully paying. So or that we sell at a discount, which would give us less money for projects. So for a good period there, that was actually above 5%. So that shows that how markets became very nervous and interest rates increased, especially for lesser rated bonds. For the higher rated bonds like Maryland, we were actually very steady and about the same as the sale from a year earlier. So that again shows that flight to quality they had mentioned before. So with all that behind me, what's the point that I'm trying to get at? First of all, interest rates, bond premiums are a hedge against rising interest rates. There's an appendix in the back of this, which I can discuss, but I'll just say what the conclusions are. There's analysis I did a number of years ago. And what it shows is if you buy bonds at a premium and interest rates increase, you will lose money because there's this inverse relationship between bond yields and bond value or price. So everybody loses money. But if you buy them at a premium, you lose less money. And this is an example I used from a 2015 sale. It was 1.4% less that was lost in value, which makes a big difference. So there's real value to investors when you think interest rates are going to increase in buying bonds at a premium. All right. It also is true the other way around, and that is that if you buy a bond and interest rates go down, you gain value. But if you bought bonds at a premium, you gain less value. So in a weird way, the trick of premiums is if you think interest rates are going to increase, they're good for you. If you think they're going to get lower, the interest rates, then you will not do as well as others. And so in an environment a few years ago in which interest rates were low, and I think it's safe to say in 2021 and 22 that they were unprecedentedly low and probably going to increase. It made a lot of sense to buy bonds at a premium then. Now that case isn't so strong anymore, and so there's less value in premiums, and there may even become a disincentive at one point in getting premiums. So what I am suggesting is the state should be very cautious in estimating premiums. I don't know what will happen in the next 2 years when the bonds are sold, but this is certainly a more risky proposition than it would have been a year or 2 or 3 ago. Final issue that I will make has to do with the assumptions that we use for authorizations. Some very weird technical stuff today, I apologize, but that's the analysis. And that is that what we do each year is we authorize bonds, and what these bonds do is they tell agencies, this is how much you can spend for a capital project. When we issue the bonds, what we're doing is we're actually paying for the capital cost. Now, most projects takes years to complete. So we usually don't issue the bonds until a few years after the authorization, when we get a bill for the construction costs or the planning costs or whatever it is that we're paying. And so there is this lag between authorizations and issuances. In the past, what we've done is we had a formula that was at least from the 80s, but it might have been from the 70s, that would use, that was the same thing, where you was like, in the first year, you sell, 31% of the bonds authorized, 25% the second year, and so forth. And it had been like that for years. And it actually worked pretty well for a while. In the last decade or less, certainly since the pandemic, that has broken down. And so last year, a study group was formed to take a look at this. And is there a better way to forecast what we actually think we will be spending, as opposed to the old formula that nobody remembers where it came from? The study group included the State Treasurer's Office, the Department of Budget and Management, and Department of Legislative Services. The solution was essentially to come up with a 10-year average. And say, this is what we've been issuing in the last 10 years, and just say that's going to be our issuance policy. That way, as the environment changes, the metric we use changes, and it's a bit of a lagging indicator, but at least it'll follow trend. And so that's what happened. And with that then, but CDAC used a different policy. I'm not exactly sure how they calculate theirs, but they have a different trend line on their issuances. So as a result, we have a different forecast now, whether you're using the one that was recommended by the study group or the one that the CDAC and the administration is using. And the chart, Exhibit 13 on page 19, shows this. The yellow is what the old authorizations would have been if we use that policy. As you can see, they're higher. Now, the blue there is the work group recommendation, and that's a little bit lower, but we expected it to be lower because one of the issues we had at the time was that we weren't spending as much as we thought we were, and so that we came up with a thing that looks more like what we've been spending. And finally, the red is what the CDAC and the administration are using, which is quite a bit less. And so why does this matter? There's two places where this matters, and page 20, Exhibit 14, shows the first one. What this chart shows here is one of the things we measure is how much debt has been authorized and unissued and how much debt has been issued. And that ratio has been pretty stable in recent years. It increased a little bit recently. And so what's authorized is what you can do. What's issued is what you are doing. And so what this chart shows with the diverging lines there is that basically each year we say we're going to do $500 million worth of projects that we don't do. And then we have this increasing backlog. And so that's what this chart shows, is that ever-increasing backlog that in projects that we say we're going to do that we're not going to do. So the implication of this is that the capital project, although we're authorizing a lot, is going to be doing a lot less than we did. The second implication is on page 21, Exhibit 15, and this is this one is finally something intuitive, I'm going to say. If you're going to do less work and you bill less hours, you will spend less money. And so this shows the debt service, and yes, if we do less work, if we build less projects, then we will spend less money and debt service costs will be less. So our recommendation is that the state use the study group's process for determining out-year forecast of debt service costs. With that, I will go to the recommended action page and say our recommendation is to concur with the governor's allowance. Like I said earlier, there's an appendix about the economics of bond premiums, and with that, I'll conclude my presentation and take questions.
Thank you. Thanks for the excellent presentation and analysis. Are there any questions for Mr. Frank? Okay. Thanks for being with us. See you. We do have our treasurer with us and his team. Oh, there you are. Treasurer Davis, good to see you. Yeah. I know we had been back and forth a little bit on the bond sales. When are those now? Are those still in June, or they were in March?
It's still in June, but I believe is it next year, John, that we go back to 2 or we were looking at two. It's as, what I'll say is, and it's as I think Mr. Frank had touched upon it, because of the volatility and so forth that's going on, we've been trying to maintain maximum flexibility so that we can watch the factors play out. There's a lot of factors that go into it, and we were concerned that, the past couple of years, if we had scheduled those two, that as things are constantly changing, we would have been in a bad situation. And I believe we looked at one, and having the one sale saved us this past year. So I think that's roughly what was going on. Okay, I don't want to sit there and tell them something wrong.
So interrupt your presentation, but I was just curious where that landed.
But yeah, I think we're hoping to get back to two as things smooth out a little bit. And I mean, I know that's we know that's a part of your budgeting process. So we do want to get back to that. I also want to say, well, let me go ahead and get started. This is John Martin, our Chief Deputy Treasurer. Rebecca Ruff, she heads up our management division. I'm sure you know them, but for the record. We also have, Mr. Tracy mentioned that earlier, we were accustomed to having three agencies award us a AAA bond rating. That's still the case. The third, instead of Moody's, it's Kroll Bond Rating Agency. They do a number of states. I don't have the exact number of states that they do, but they do a number. They gave the state a AAA. So we do have three for those that are important. And, this is my own personal pet peeve, but the reality is I think all the states are AAA bond rating. If the measure is, if the purpose of a bond rating is whether or not an investor will get their money back, then, which is what I assume a bond rating is about, no state in the union has defaulted on a bond in like 94 years. It was like 1934, and that was during the Great Depression. I believe it was Arkansas, so we can give them a pass for defaulting during the Great Depression. But no one else since then has defaulted on it. This is, I mean, they should call it what it is, that they're analyzing what they believe to be people's or states' business climate, but it's not a bond rating from the standpoint of whether or not somebody's going to get their bond back. And even though we are not, if I can stay there, even though we're not using Moody's this year, they're still rating our bonds. They're obligated to do that. We're just not paying them to do it. And we're not required to do that. So, and that was my choice. So if anybody has a problem, none of these good people are responsible for that. That's strictly on me. Again, I don't want to take up your time. Mr. Tracy was very thorough and gave an excellent presentation. We had for each of the bonds or tranches that we had 4 different ones, and we had 6 people bidding on them, or 6 entities bidding on them. And I think that says a lot. Maryland pays its bills. That's what it comes down to. You know it, we know it, and that's the real reason. I mean, we can get into nuance things about it, but the bottom line is they know if they invest in our bonds, they're going to get their money back. So we would concur with the governor's allowance, and if you have any questions, we would be more than happy to answer them.
Thank you. Thanks for your work. Thanks for your stewardship. Any questions, Delegate Stanco?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Mr. Treasurer, for joining us. I guess a comment that'll lead to a question, right? So appreciate that, history lesson as well. I think one thing that I always remember from the GFC and thinking about MBS and the rating agencies at the time, and at the time it was banks picking rating agencies, is that there was assumption that the housing market could defy, like it was a law of physics that the housing market couldn't go down, right? And so you think about what you said, the history lesson of the Great Depression and that framework. And at the time, for anyone in the context, like banks were picking rating agencies, and rating agencies were getting paid by those same banks. So it was like it remains to be a very disconnected framework. But I think it's just being thoughtful in that, right? Like, you can disagree with the rating from Moody's. And I think that at the same time, we need to be conscious of why is a downgrade happening, and what is the potential impact if business climate turns further in a recession that is inevitable. There are business cycles, right? When that happens, who the governor is, any of those things could be a while, it could be tomorrow. And that impact directly matters to state workers, to state taxpayers, and our ability to meet those investors, right? To go back to the bond market and issue more debt and make sure all of our state employees and such are paid. So that's kind of my history lesson. Like, we have these assumed laws of physics that don't exist in the financial markets. And I think that we need to be conscious of making sure that we're not aggressively picking our rating agencies as well. And so if it's a one-off situation that I feel like it's a disagreement with Moody's, like if that was to happen again, like there becomes a situation of that happening over and over again that I wouldn't want to see. And so maybe just to make this a question, how did you think about replacing Moody's specifically with this agency?
Well, to be clear, what you mentioned earlier about banks picking their rating agencies, effectively that's what goes on now. It's our decision, so to speak, ours meaning all the states, and we pay them to rate our bonds. Now, I believe they're still obligated once they do it through the life of the bonds, but we pay them to do it. So it's still the same situation. And what happened was, in my view, nothing's really changed. All the things they noted, all the things that they noted for their rationale for reducing our bonds, they had been saying it at least for my entire time as treasurer, and probably before then. The difference was they pretty much said it. They were switching over, and bluntly, we were never it's been a long time since we had been a AAA rated state based upon quantitative measures only. But they gave us credit for things like the Capital Debt Affordability Committee, the Spending Affordability Committee, all of these types and that's what they mean by the management structures. But once, for whatever reason, they decided they wanted to move away from that, I guess we had too many AAA rated states. So once they moved away from using the qualitative measures in conjunction with the quantitative measures and relied almost exclusively on quantitative measures, then that's what happened with us. So I guess what I'm trying to say is nothing's really changed with us. Yeah, we're probably have a little more debt than what we'd like, or for a variety of very important reasons, but not a lot's changed. We didn't change, they changed. So that's what I would say. But we aren't cherry picking that as well. There's a lot that went on with us in Moody's. Well, now I'll just put it out there. When they were talking, now this will be quick. There's a sense that, this sort of king or emperor type of things, they call here, they weren't very professional, at least some of the folks that we were in contact with, they weren't very professional. Some would say they were nasty. And that always got to me. I'm paying you to be nasty to me. So that didn't go over really well. Yeah. So I was like, we don't need you. There are other people that can do this. To hell with you. And I literally said that. So, they have a heart attack whenever I go off the rails, but it's just how it is. So I wanted to be clear. We didn't go, I think the lawyers in here would call it forum shopping. We didn't do that. We just thought we had a better relationship. with someone else, and we can't discount the fact that Standard & Poor's and Fitch, who are, in my opinion, just as well reputable, and have been doing this just as long, they didn't basically change their criterion. And they noted, like Moody's, that we were high debt and things of that nature, as they always have, but they stuck with their AAA bond rating. So the takeaway is Moody changed, no one else did.
Appreciate that, and just a brief framework is, you mentioned the lawyers in here, the bankers in here, which is literally me, right? It's like, it's the unknown, right? It's the purpose of, how I see it is the purpose of those ratings is to really manage the unknown, right? And try to account for the unknown. And that's the purpose of a credit underwriting at its core. And so, just as like I said, I think any of us can cherry pick one-off poor experience with another, but and without the goal of making it some political statement, right? But more of if we run into this issue again, I think it's the level of a wake-up conversation that would need to be had. So thank you.
That's fair. Yep.
Yeah, and I think, even their own analysis seemed to be veering off with how we're raising our money rather than how much money we're raising. I mean, I think at some point they flagged our reliance on lottery and gaming, and it just seemed to be really far out in left field, some of the criteria that didn't actually have objective. Sort of, if we're raising money and we are paying our bills, why do you care how we're raising it? It seemed a little odd to me. Delegate Metzger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Treasurer Davis, I've had several questions, but to keep you from going off the rails,
Good luck.
just how far are we, or how close are we to getting our AAA rating back?
We have our rating.
Okay, it is. Okay.
Go ahead, I'll let the treasurer.
Are you talking about from Moody's?
Yes.
They laid out, and I think Mr. Frank covered it. They told us what we would need to do
that's what I'm getting at,
to get back there. I don't have the list in front of me. I believe you do, but if we're just being perfectly honest with you, it's, in my view, it's a lot easier to lose it than to gain it back.
I understand.
It's, even if we do some of the things that we're told, it's going to probably take a yeoman's effort to get back because that's just how it's been. But again, we're comfortable with where we are right now. We know that you guys do an excellent job. You guys, the Senate, the governor, in managing the state. Like I said, they've always complimented the state on its management structures, things that we need to do. We have fiscal challenges there's no way around that, but we will address it. And again, Maryland's going to pay its bills.
Yes, sir. And I understand, and I honor you, sir. I really do. You and I talked the other day. I had something for you. So if you will turn around, my chief of staff, Paul Blitz, has got that particular item for you. And that'll keep you from getting off the rails.
Thank you very much.
That'll keep you from going off the rails.
Does he have a third one? I don't get a.
I better cover this up quick. Thank you.
All right, well, you kept him from going off the rails by completely going off the rails. That was really good work. One-upped him. I do think it's important to note that the other two rating agencies kept us a AAA bond rating. I think Mr. Frank noted that. We still maintain our AAA bond rating. It's solid. And with regard to our borrowing, they use 2 out of 3. Isn't that right? So we still do have our AAA bond rating. Any other questions for the treasurer? Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
See you.
Thank you all.
Going to move to State Retirement Agency, Mr. Cash. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, my name is Jacob Cash, and I'll be presenting the budget analysis for the State Retirement Agency, or SRA. SRA, at the direction of the Board of Trustees, has primary responsibility over the state's retirement systems. The fiscal 2027 allowance is $67.1 million, which is a $3 million increase over last year, mostly due to salaries and wages that are increasing in the non-budgeted investment division. Something I'd like to point out on the cover page is the change in the budget composition from non-budgeted special and reimbursable funds to now only non-budgeted and special funds. The reimbursable and special funds in fiscal 26 and in previous years were sourced from state agency and local participating agency administrative fees. But legislation was passed last year that did away with those fees, and so now fiscal 27 and future years will only be funded, SRA will only be funded through special funds sourced from the pension trust fund, as the fees that are required to fund SRA are now built into the contribution rates that are charged to employers. The investment division will remain non-budgeted, and that makes up 42% of the allowance. Moving to page 4. Exhibit 1 shows the membership in the state's retirement system by active employees and retirees. And continuing a trend seen last year, the number of active members grew more than the number of retirees, which put downward pressure on contribution rates. Exhibit 3 on page 6 shows SRA's call center wait times, which is one of the performance measures we use for SRA. The agency has struggled for several years to meet their wait time and dropped call goals. But since September 2024, wait times have improved to be within the 3-minute goal, and they're currently under 30 seconds. SRA attributes that improvement primarily to filling positions that were vacant and implementing metrics-based management tactics and more generous telework policies. Exhibit 5 on page 8 shows the fiscal 2027 budget compared to fiscal 26. Within the administration division, cost increases are due primarily to the statewide cost of living adjustments and health insurance costs. Other large changes are due to rental costs, reductions in shared services because they brought HR in-house last year, if you remember, moving that from Department of Budget and Management. Overall employment and salary levels are on the rise. The Board of Trustees has authority to establish the compensation levels for the investment division, and those employees must use objective criteria to determine their salary levels. That criteria is primarily related to type and quality of work. Salaries are increasing for the non-budgeted division. Moving to page 9 for personnel. There's 3 positions abolished in SRA due to the voluntary separation program that, if you remember, was executed by the governor in the fall. That generated over $200,000 in ongoing savings for this budget. And then the non-budgeted investment division adds 8 new positions in 2027, including administration and investment positions. That's about $1 million added. SRA vacancies have declined over the past year, but they are elevated compared to their budgeted turnover, and there's room in the budget to reduce vacancies more by about 7 positions. Issue 1 is about the system's performance. Exhibit 6 on page 10 shows the state's investment performance in fiscal 25 by asset allocation. The total fund performance was 9.83%. And the system assets totaled $73.6 billion at the close of the year, which represented growth of $4.4 billion. On page 13, Exhibit 8 compares the system to its benchmarks. Overall, the system beat benchmarks by 0.3%, indicating that the system's use of active management is yielding returns above what could be achieved through passive approaches. The asset classes where the system failed to reach their benchmarks, in those classes, they actually outperformed the actuarial assumed rate of return of 6.8%, so they are still doing good there. Moving to page 15, Exhibit 10 shows the system's funding levels since 2006, the funded ratio. The system closed fiscal 25 with a 73.5% funded ratio, which is a stabilization in that ratio since it started to decline, as you can see in the chart from its peak in 2021. Moving to Exhibit 11 on page 16. Last thing I'll talk about for this budget, current law requires the state to subsidize a variable share of the employer contribution of local teacher employees or local employees in the teachers' retirement systems. The BRFA of 2025, so the BRFA last year, lowered the state subsidy by $97.7 million in fiscal 26, flowing through to future years. And now the current BRFA is reducing that subsidy further by $39 million. Exhibit 11 shows the 26 and 27 cost shifts in relation to the overall amount that the state's providing and that the local governments are responsible for. The state cost share is about 72% in the 27 budget. But that concludes my presentation. We recommend to concur with the governor's allowance, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Excellent. Thank you for the great analysis. Any questions for our analyst? Okay, thanks for being with us. We still have our treasurer with us, so Mr. Treasurer, come on back up, and I know you have state pensions folks with you, including, I think, our director, Jonathan Martin. Anyone else you want to bring up?
Good afternoon once again. I'm going to be brief because I want you to hear from the lady to my left. Again, John's, he's wearing a couple of hats, so today, or for the purposes of this hearing and with the State Retirement Association, he's the acting executive director. He serves in that function as the acting executive director. To my left is Ms. Diane Sandoval. She's our chief investment officer. She's been with us about 3 weeks, and it took us a while. We had some changes that we needed to undergo with the State Retirement Agency, but speaking on behalf of the board, we're very excited to have Ms. Sandoval with us. She comes to us from the private sector with just a wealth of knowledge. She was impressed with Maryland. She liked what we were doing. I think she came to us from Australia. So she moved back to the United States. Took a pay cut and everything. So, that wise steward thing we still have going on. But she's going to do just fabulous things with the system. We were all very excited to have her on. She's considering a number of things that will move the system forward. So I wanted you to hear from her. I always forget to do this, so we concur with the recommendation from the governors for the allowance. So let me get that part out of the way. The rate of returns, I know that that's always of particular importance. We normally do roughly a 6.8 assumed rate of return. We did a 9.83 rate last year. And the fiscal, regarding the fiscal status of the fund, we had a slight uptick from 73.5 in fiscal year 24 to 73.9. There's still work to be done, but we are heading in the right direction, and we think we have the right leadership in place. So with that.
Thank you. My name is Diane Sandoval, and as Treasurer Davis said, I have over 30 years of investment experience, and I've had the great honor of investing on behalf of public beneficiaries across the world. I've worked in places like the Middle East and Europe, Latin America, Australia. I look to humbly bring that experience to bear as the new Chief Investment Officer for Maryland State Retirement and Pension System. The only other comment I want to make is I believe deeply in partnership and working with this legislature and with the communities we serve. Finally, I'm grateful for the chance to serve, and I really look forward to working together to protect the retirement security for the amazing teachers, police officers, and public servants of Maryland.
Well, welcome and congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else
I'm
presenting?
sorry, and I forgot our Mr. Byrd. He was our interim, he's been with the agency a long time, and he was 24 years, and he was our interim executive director before Ms. Sandoval came, so he served in that role, I guess, about 6 months. Okay. So, great. Bob, I don't know if you wanted to.
Are you presenting or just here for questions?
Yeah.
Just here for questions? Okay.
All right.
Excellent. All right, are there questions? Yes. Doug Spiegel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome, Mr. Treasurer. Thanks to your team. I just wanted to ask if you wanted to take a moment to address the audit finding on fund management fees that was referenced in the DLS report.
Bob, you want to take that one?
Yeah, this regarded the verification of private fund fees. We have like 400 private market funds. So we're not able to verify all of them given the number. So we use a sampling approach, and that sampling approach has been to verify all those funds with quarterly fees greater than 1 million. OLA recommended that we expand that process to include more funds, and we concur. And we are in the process of developing a new verification process that will expand the number of private market funds.
Thank you.
Thank you.
She's doing great. You know that's my bestie, so. See? Yeah. Yeah. All right, let's move on to Maryland Supplemental Retirement Plans. Mr. Cash, still with us.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. For the record, I'll be going over the Maryland Supplemental Retirement Plans budget. And my name is Jacob Cash. MSRP provides employees with 3 defined contribution supplemental retirement plan options, which include a 401k, a 457B, and a 401A match program. MSRP previously offered a 4th plan, a 403B plan for higher education employees, but that plan was frozen effective January 1st, 2026, due to recommendations from the MSRP Board of Trustees. MSRP funds its operations with a fee on member accounts, and those are represented as special funds in the budget. If you join me on the cover page, you can see the fiscal 27 allowance is $2.6 million in those special funds, which is a 6% increase over the last year. Most of that increase is due to statewide shared services allocations, which supports the MSRP human resources, IT, and admin functions. Personnel costs also increased in MSRP this year due to regular salary increases and fringe costs. Moving to page 2, Exhibit 1 shows agency spending in 2027, and 3/4 of that is for personnel, most of the remaining costs being for shared services and contracts. Moving to the first issue on page 4. MSRP recently changed vendors for its plan administrator contract as a result of a competitive procurement process. That plan administrator is responsible for providing critical services to members in regards to selecting, accessing, and tracking their supplemental retirement plans. Empower was selected by the Board of Trustees in April 2025 to replace the previous vendor, which was Nationwide. Fees that are imposed on member accounts for plan administration have reduced significantly with this new contract. The previous fees were 0.775% of assets, and the new rate is less than half of that at 0.335% of assets. That change is estimated to result in members retaining an additional $2.4 million in fiscal 2026. The transition to the new vendor began in May 2025, with dozens of meetings being held between Empower, MSRP, financial offices, and the Central Payroll Bureau within the Office of the Comptroller. MSRP, the member services team within MSRP, held 13 on-site services sessions at various agencies when the enrollment was reopened following a blackout period in late September. Exhibit 5 shows the call volumes and speed of answer. The first week of enrollment was the most challenging period for the call center, but wait times have largely trended with call volumes since then. The overall survey satisfaction rating was 4.51 out of 5, with a 2.5% abandonment rate. Now to page 6 for issue 2. Chapter 100 of 2023 reestablished the state match program for up to $600 for state employees participating in a supplemental plan. And there was about $12.5 million in funding budgeted in agency expenses since that was reestablished. In fiscal 26, funding, however, was not provided directly to agencies. They were required to find the savings elsewhere in their budgets to find for the match. And DLS expects most of those agencies to pay for the match with vacancy savings, fund balance, and other savings that they've generated during fiscal 2026. As a result of the committee narrative in last year's JCR, fiscal 2027 budget was properly submitted with funding in a dedicated sub-object at the agency level, so they won't be responsible to find savings elsewhere to pay for it. The match has also driven growth in program participation. So you can see in Exhibit 4, MSRP saw 8.5% growth in the number of contributing members in fiscal 25, and high growth is predicted again in fiscals 26 and 27, although DLS is asking MSRP to comment on why it anticipates that growth. On page 8, Exhibit 5 shows plan expenses and revenues. Participant fees that are levied by MSRP are 50 cents per month, and with MSRP in addition to the Empower rate of 0.76% of assets charged on member accounts. The closing balance in fiscal 25 was 24% of expenses, which is slightly below the goal of 25. But the closing balance in fiscal 26 is expected to be 29%, so they would be above the goal then. You can also see on that chart the plan administrator fees, where it reflects the reduction due to the change in rates. MSRP plan options gained 10.7% in fiscal 2025, which slightly underperformed their single-year benchmarks, but their 3, 5, and 10-year benchmarks were comparable. DLS is asking MSRP to comment on their recent underperformance compared to those benchmarks. But in conclusion, we recommend concurring with the governor's allowance. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Once again, thanks for the great analysis. Any questions? Okay, thanks. Have a great weekend. We are joined by our director, Director Bell. Welcome. And your team, if you want to bring them up.
Good afternoon, Chair Barnes and Vice Chair Kaiser and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Rhonda Bell, and I am the Executive Director of the Maryland Supplemental Retirement Plans. With me today is Nakia Smith, our Deputy Executive Director and CFO. We are grateful for the analysis provided by Jacob Cash, and we're thankful to hear that he has agreed with the governor's allowance. So we're here and happy to answer any questions you might have today.
Nice and simple. Any questions? Okay, thanks for your great work.
Thank you.
Thanks for being with us. Oh, I'm sorry. Delegate Spiegel does have a question.
Difficult on a Friday afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did just want to follow up on the DLS recommendation to ask about the plan's recent underperformance. I don't know if you all had a response to that.
Yes.
Let me give you my.
No. Thank you. With respect to the underperformance noted for the one-year period, that period was for June 30th, 2025. The period between that was July 1st, 2024 through June 30th, 2025. And it's important to note that during that time period, there was significant market volatility due to the tariffs and associate sell-off. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
We'll turn to our last agency for today. We have our Maryland Cannabis Administration, and Victoria Martinez is our analyst. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Victoria Martinez, and I'll be presenting the Maryland Cannabis Administration analysis. MCA works to create an equitable, safe, and accessible medical and adult use cannabis program, primarily through overseeing licensing and regulation. As you can see on the first page of the analysis, the fiscal 2027 allowance decreases by $3.4 million, or 10%, for a total of $29.3 million. MCA is entirely funded by special funds from the Cannabis Regulation and Enforcement Fund, which is funded primarily through cannabis tax revenues. There is one proposed deficiency that's discussed on page 2 of the analysis that adds $161,000 in special funds to cover additional Office of Social Equity expenditures. And moving on to the overview of agency spending, Exhibit 1 on page 3 shows an overview of agency spending in the fiscal 2027 allowance. The majority of agency spending, about 49%, is for personnel, but there is also an additional 13% for cannabis enforcement and 10% for public health education. Exhibit 2, beginning on page 4, shows a breakdown of the $3.4 million decrease in fiscal 2027. The largest change is a decrease of $5 million in one-time funds for the Cannabis Incubator Project. There's also a decrease due to the transfer of the Office of Social Equity to the Department of Social and Economic Mobility, and other decreases in administrative expenses, which are partially offset by increases for personnel, software-related expenses, and various research initiatives. In terms of personnel, that's discussed briefly on page 6. There was no change in the number of regular positions, and MCA has a vacancy rate of 5.8% with 6 vacant positions. The first key observation, beginning on page 7, provides an update on MCA's licensing activities. MCA issues 3 categories of licenses, including growers, processors, and dispensaries. Exhibit 3 on page 7 shows licenses issued by type, with a slight decrease in total licenses in fiscal 2025. In its first licensing round, which was only for social equity applicants, MCA awarded 205 conditional licenses, which would more than double the total number of current licenses. Conditional licenses have 18 months to become operational, and so they're due to become operational in calendar 2026. The second licensing round can be held beginning after May 1st, 2024, but a second licensing round has not yet been announced. The second key observation, beginning on page 9, discusses market trends in cannabis sales. Exhibit 4 on page 9 shows the total retail sales and average cost per gram of cannabis. Retail sales totaled $1.2 billion in 2025, which is a 7% increase over the prior year, and the average cost per gram of cannabis decreased to $8.57 in 2025. Exhibit 5 on page 10 provides a breakdown of market sales by product type, showing that most sales come from cannabis flower product, followed by concentrate and edible products. Exhibit 6 on page 11 shows monthly dispensary transactions for adult use and medical cannabis. Although adult use cannabis purchases continue to increase since legalization in July 2023, medical cannabis transactions decrease. There's also a decrease in individuals registering as medical patients, which is shown on Exhibit 7 on page 12. The next key observation provides an overview of cannabis tax revenues and distributions. A provision in the BRFA of 2025 increased the sales and use tax rate on cannabis from 9% to 12%, with revenues from the additional 3% tax distributed entirely to the general fund. This tax increase provided an additional $6.7 million to the general fund in the first quarter of fiscal 2026. Exhibit 8 on page 13 shows quarterly tax revenue, with tax revenue totaling $71.8 million in fiscal 2025. And then Exhibit 9 on page 15 provides a breakdown of the distributions from those tax revenues. Tax revenues are distributed for certain purposes that are established in statute. The original 9% cannabis tax is distributed first to cover MCA's operations, and then 35% to the Community Reinvestment and Repair Fund, 5% to counties, 5% to the Cannabis Public Health Fund, and 5% to the Cannabis Business Assistance Fund. And then any remaining revenue is distributed to the general fund. The last key observation that I'll discuss is on the Cannabis Incubator Project. This project provides funds for a cannabis incubator space, which is a licensed premise in which micro licensees may operate a cannabis business, including processing and storing cannabis for sale and delivery off-site. The incubator space would provide small businesses access to equipment and space to address any operational or financial barriers, and would be the first state-run cannabis incubator in the country. Although the Armory facility located in Catonsville was previously selected as the facility for the cannabis incubator space, MCA reported that this was no longer a viable site, and they are currently in the process of selecting a new site. The project received general fund pay-go appropriations of $2 million in fiscal 2025 and $5 million in fiscal 2026. Considering that the project has been delayed and a site has not been selected, the timeline for spending the fiscal 2026 funding is unclear. So DLS requests that MCA provide an update on the status of the project and also recommends reducing the fiscal 2026 appropriation of $5 million for the Cannabis Incubator Project to defer acquisition and build-out activities until a site has been selected and the $2 million that was encumbered has been spent. And that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you for the great analysis. Are there any questions? Okay, thanks for being with us. Have a good weekend. We'll now turn to the agency, and we have our director, Tabitha Robinson, and please feel free to bring your team up.
Good afternoon, Chair Barnes, Vice Chair Kaiser, and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Tabitha Robinson. I serve as the Director of the Maryland Cannabis Administration. This is the first time I appear before you all as confirmed in my position, so it really is a pleasure to be here today. Thank you so much. I'm joined here by two colleagues from MCA, including Selena Raleigh. She's our Deputy Chief of Legislative Affairs, and Ugo Uso, he's our Chief Financial Officer. In response to the Department of Legislative Services analysis of the MCA operating budget, the administration supports the governor's allowance. However, we respectfully but strongly disagree with DLS's recommendation to reduce the general fund appropriation for the cannabis incubator by $5 million. I want to be clear, the incubator initiative is not theoretical, it is already underway. In fact, since the Senate hearing 3 weeks ago, we have continued to advance this work in a measurable way. MCA is tasked with developing Maryland's first incubator focused exclusively on cannabis microbusinesses. It will be the first of its kind in its nation. Last December, we initially identified 11 viable sites as a shortlist. 3 were sold before we could complete visits, which just underscores the competitive nature of the real estate market right now. From January to February, we've conducted site visits at the remaining 8 locations in coordination with the Department of General Services and the Maryland Economic Development Corporation. As a result of that work, we've narrowed down the list to final candidates. We have 3, using a structured criteria-based rubric. Now we are prepared to move into the due diligence phase, and removing the $5 million would materially slow our ability to execute this initiative. We appreciate the thoughtful analysis from DLS and the collaboration with DBM, and we look forward to continuing to work with the community. MCA anticipates closing the acquisition of this incubator property in the first quarter of fiscal year '27. You have a written testimony which provides detailed information, but I also want to briefly touch on a couple of key accomplishments and priorities for the agency. Maryland's first social equity-only licensing round selected applicants across business types and jurisdictions. Following withdrawals and denials, 169 from this lottery group are currently in conditional licensure, and 14 have progressed to full licensure. These new licenses represent the next generation of Maryland cannabis businesses and are central to the state's commitment to equity, economic opportunity, and inclusive industry growth. The agency regularly conducts inspections across growers, processors, and dispensaries and laboratories to ensure public health and safety are being met. In 2025, we completed about 700 inspections across the state. MCA continues to expand the cannabis industry workforce development program in partnership with the Department of Labor's Earn Maryland program. This program provides free virtual and in-person training for retail, processing, and cultivation careers across Maryland. To date, 1,200 participants have completed our courses across 7 counties. The average age is 41. Many of these participants are on their second career. We are currently pursuing national accreditation for this education program, and we see this as one of the ways we contribute to a growing workforce across the state. The incubator will also serve as a site for these workforce development programs. Lastly, public education remains a priority for the Maryland Cannabis Administration. Under our Be Cannabis Smart campaign, we have statewide education programs preventing drug driving, unsafe storage, and emphasizing responsible use. In August of 2025, we launched our Trusted Source campaign to help consumers identify licensed, regulated stores. In this coming fiscal year, the agency intends to launch a youth prevention program with the Maryland Department of Health. In closing, MCA is committed to ensuring Maryland's cannabis industry is equitable, well-regulated, and centered on public health and safety. We appreciate the General Assembly's continued partnership. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Thanks for your presentation and leadership. Any questions, Delegate Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and congratulations again on your full confirmation. I just have 2 questions. One, I saw in the analysis that approximately 12 licensees either were a combination of withdrew their licenses or otherwise were not able to successfully obtain them. I wanted to know if you could further distill on what were the challenges so that we can be helpful for some of those others that are still conditional, because it seems like there's a technical assistance gap, and I just don't have a sense of what are the prevailing challenges on the whole. And then I have one other additional question.
Thank you for the question, Delegate. The denials and rescissions that you're referring to are largely due to non-responsiveness. We have issued notices of failure to respond, notices of intent to rescind, notices of 5 days until rescission, and then finally the rescission. So most of what you're seeing is based upon the licensee's actions. Now, the second question that I hear is regarding technical assistance and how are we helping those conditional licensees get across the gap. The direct services that the state provides goes through the Office of Social Equity with the Department of Social and Economic Mobility. We work very closely with them, and they provide a lot of that technical assistance, that education training. MCA plays the role in terms of helping them set up their facilities, making sure that they don't spend exorbitant amounts of money on facilities closing vaults and putting up cement and then have to redo it because it doesn't comply with our regulations. So the assistance we provide is in helping them get over the finish line, but we do not provide that direct services.
Thank you for that clarification. And I also, thank you for that clarification. I appreciate it. Another question I had is you were mentioning in your testimony around the public education, which also could be deemed kind of like marketing, because these are things I encounter on television commercials or things of that nature. So I know that we do not allow advertising in the state of Maryland around cannabis in the ways that other states do. So in many ways, the only messaging the public is honestly hearing about cannabis is usually from a place of caution. It's not about the market, right? And so I see that we have revenues of approximately $78 million annually, and I know a bit of that will grow as our conditional licensees and so forth become, solidified. But we have states like Missouri that are approximately similar in size but far less wealthy, and they have annual revenues of $225 million. So with overwhelming support across all the counties in this state through the public referendum on support for cannabis, do you believe that not having more robust marketing opportunities for our businesses will really prevent their ability to be competitive, particularly because the only marketing that's happening is education of caution?
Mm-hmm. MCA, in partnership with the Department of Health as well as ATCC that handles the enforcement of illicit shops, together we've really tried to address the need for education in terms of telling consumers where they can find safe products. Now, a lot of the messaging has been the sort of cautionary, right? How to make sure children don't access edibles and so forth, and we see that as important. The most recent phase of public education, which we've entered into last year, is our Trusted Source campaign, and that has really directed traffic towards the licensed shops. For example, if you go to a licensed dispensary, you will see a sticker on the window with a QR code. That is how you verify that this is a licensed business. You can scan the QR code with your phone, and it will take you to an MCA website that provides that verification. So we really see the state's role in terms of moving towards how do we explain the difference between licensed product and unregulated product, and we know that that will play a role in terms of increasing sales. But to your point, Delegate, we're limited in what we can do, right? And we are addressing the market as a whole, but we are not focused on any particular licensees. Now, I do agree with you that the existing advertising statute does play a role in terms of creating public vagueness in terms of, is cannabis legal? Well, I haven't seen it. I see other legal products being advertised. I see alcohol. I see some tobacco, but I don't quite see cannabis. And so, yes, we do support a change to the advertising statute to help businesses better market their products, but also being mindful of course, the public health and public safety concerns there. We also see the ways in which a change in advertising statute could be helpful for those social equity licensees who are in the pipeline, who are trying to get consumers into their stores, and because they haven't been open yet and open for very long, they don't have the same type of customer loyalty that some of our existing businesses do. So that is a change that we support.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Director Robinson, for your presentation. I watched from a little bit of a distance at the Catonsville Armory incubator plan went off the rails. There's a lot of public outreach. As you zero in on your new site for the incubator, what are your plans to engage with the community ahead of time before the site's chosen, or to explain what the site is and isn't? Because there was a lot of misinformation in that discussion. And so what plans do you have to make sure this site goes better?
Excellent question, and it's a huge priority of ours. How can we learn from lessons in the past? We are, as I mentioned, expediting the timeline for this for this incubator, as it's a priority of the state. Now, one of the things that we are doing now is moving up the timeline for due diligence. Right, so as we are looking at the structure of the building, as we're checking that the walls are strong, as we're checking for asbestos, let's say many of these buildings are old, we're also engaging the community. We see those as things that need to occur at the same time, simultaneously. Previously, we looked at asbestos and mold and structure first, and then we intended to engage the community. And in that gap is where the lesson is now. So over the next couple months, we will be moving towards that type of community engagement.
Good plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't see any other questions, so thank you so much and congratulations again.
Thank you so much.
All right, we're adjourned.